The hunt begins. The crimson dawn broke over Xerion's triple peaks, painting the sky in shades of blood and amber. Kayla stood atop the ritual platform, her silver scales catching the morning light like 1,000 tiny mirrors. 27 bone trophies hung from her ceremonial belt, each one representing a perfect kill, a life taken with precision and honor. Today would mark her 28th. The crowd below stirred with anticipation. Warriors of the Zephyr clan had gathered to witness what many believed would be Kayla's final hunt before ascension to War Matriarch. She was, after all, the deadliest huntress their world had ever produced. No prey had lasted more than 3 hours once she began the chase. No quarry had ever drawn her blood. "The offering has arrived," announced Elder Thane, his weathered voice, carrying across the plaza. The crowd parted as guards led a figure onto the platform. Kayla's vertical pupils dilated as she studied the prisoner. He was human, male, perhaps 30 rotations by their count. His dark hair was unkempt, his clothing torn from captivity, but his brown eyes held no fear. Marcus Chen, according to the datapad, captured during a raid on a human colony ship that had strayed too close to Xerion's protected space. Former Special Operations Soldier, the report noted. Trained killer. Kayla's lips curled in what might have been a smile. The humans were new to this sector of space, soft and weak compared to most species. Their bodies lacked natural armor. Their senses were dull and they tired easily. This one might last 4 hours if he was lucky. "You may choose your prey," Elder Thane intoned, gesturing to the line of prisoners. Kayla didn't hesitate. She pointed one clawed finger at the human. Him. Marcus met her gaze without flinching. There was something in his eyes, a spark she'd seen in the reflection of still water just before the storm. Interesting. The ritual words were spoken. The prey was given a head start. 1 hour to run, to hide, to prepare. Most used this time to panic, to exhaust themselves fleeing blindly into Xerion's unforgiving wilderness. But as the guards released Marcus's restraints, he did something unexpected. He stretched. Slowly, methodically, he worked each muscle group, rolling his shoulders, flexing his fingers. Then he turned to face Kayla directly. "See you soon," he said in accented Zephyrian, and walked calmly toward the jungle's edge. Kayla watched him go, her hunting instincts already cataloging his gait, his bearing, the way he held his head. Something was different about this one. No matter. Different or not, he would die like all the others. The hour passed like seconds. When the ceremonial horn sounded, Kayla descended from the platform with fluid grace. The crowd cheered as she entered the jungle, her specialized hunting, armor adapting its color to match the surroundings. Her pulse remained steady. This was what she was born for. The human's trail was easy to follow at first. Broken branches, disturbed soil, the alien scent of his sweat. He was heading northeast, toward the bleeding cliffs. A poor choice. The terrain there was treacherous, full of hidden crevices and unstable ground. He would trap himself. But 2 hours into the hunt, something changed. The trail began to double back, split, merge. Decoy paths appeared, some obvious, others subtle. Kayla found herself having to slow down, to think. When had prey ever made her think? She followed what seemed to be the main trail to a small clearing. There, arranged on a flat rock, were several items. Strips of cloth from his prison uniform, a handful of Xerion berries, and scratched into the stone, a message in clumsy Zephyrian. "The hunter becomes the hunted." Kayla's scales prickled with an unfamiliar sensation. Was it anticipation? She'd never felt challenged during a hunt before. Her prey had always been reactive, running in fear. This human was playing a different game. A branch snapped behind her. Kayla spun, her natural reflexes faster than any human could hope to match. But Marcus wasn't trying to match her speed. He'd used the distraction to attack from her blind spot, swinging a makeshift club fashioned from a fallen branch. She dodged easily, but not quite fast enough. The club grazed her shoulder, and for the first time in her life, Kayla felt the sting of being struck by prey. Green blood welled from the shallow cut. Marcus didn't press his advantage. He was already moving, melting back into the foliage with surprising skill. Kayla touched the wound, staring at her own blood with a mixture of shock and something else she couldn't quite name. "Impressive," she whispered to the empty clearing. Then louder, knowing he could hear her. "But you'll need more than tricks to survive what's coming." She began to track him again, but now there was a new element to the hunt. For the first time in her 27 kills, Kayla found herself wondering not when she would catch her prey, but if. The jungle grew denser as they moved deeper into Zarian's wild heart. Ancient trees towered overhead, their canopy so thick it blocked out most light. Bioluminescent fungi provided an eerie glow, casting dancing shadows that made tracking difficult. Marcus was learning. His false trails became more sophisticated, using natural obstacles and native wildlife paths to confuse his scent. He'd figured out that Kayla's species relied heavily on thermal vision, and had started using mud and water to mask his heat signature, The second sun began to set. Kayla found herself genuinely challenged. Her prey wasn't just running, he was thinking, adapting, turning the environment to his advantage. When she discovered a pit trap he'd constructed, crude but cleverly hidden, she actually laughed. The sound startled a flock of razor wings, sending them shrieking into the twilight. "You're full of surprises, human," she called out, knowing he was somewhere nearby, watching. But this only ends one way. A response came from an unexpected direction. "Does it? Your whole culture is built on the assumption that hunters are always stronger than prey. What happens when that assumption is wrong?" Kayla whirled toward the voice, but he was already gone. His words lingered, though, scratching at something deep in her mind. No one had ever questioned the natural order before. Hunters hunted. Prey died. That was the way of Zarian. The chase continued through the night. Most prey would have collapsed from exhaustion by now, but Marcus seemed to be pacing himself, conserving energy. He was also leading her somewhere specific. She could sense it in the deliberate nature of his path. As the moons rose, casting silver light through gaps in the canopy, Kayla realized they were heading toward the Whispering Gorge. Ancient, dangerous, and forbidden to all but the most experienced hunters. The gorge was home to creatures that even she approached with caution. She quickened her pace. Whatever the human was planning, she needed to stop him before he entered that cursed place. But as she crested the ridge overlooking the gorge, she saw she was too late. Marcus stood at the entrance to a narrow cave system, one that she knew led deep into the gorge's deadly interior. "Don't be a fool," she called out. "That way leads to death for both of us." He turned to face her, and in the moonlight, she could see he was exhausted but determined. Blood ran from numerous small cuts where the jungle had taken its toll. But his eyes still held that storm-ready spark. "Maybe," he said, "but I've survived worse. Question is, have you?" Before she could respond, he disappeared into the cave. Kayla stood at the entrance, her every instinct screaming warnings. The Whispering Gorge had claimed even veteran hunters. To follow him inside was madness, but to abandon the hunt was unthinkable. And something else, something she didn't want to examine too closely, pulled her forward. This human had done something no prey had ever done before. He'd made her uncertain. Taking a deep breath, Kayla entered the cave, leaving the familiar jungle behind. The hunt was far from over, and, for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure of the outcome. The pursuit. The cave system opened into a vast underground network that wound through the Whispering Gorge like the arteries of some ancient beast. Kayla moved cautiously, her scales automatically adjusting to the near-total darkness, picking up the faint heat signatures left by Marcus's passage. The human was perhaps 20 minutes ahead, maintaining his lead with careful precision. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, each drop echoing through the chambers like a countdown. Air carried strange scents, minerals, decay, and something else that made her hunting instincts scream caution. These caves were old, older than her civilization. carved by forces that predated the first Zephyr clan's rise to prominence. As she descended deeper, the walls began to show signs of ancient artwork, primitive scratches and symbols that told stories her people had forgotten. Stories of when Zerion was young, and hunters were not always the apex predators they believed themselves to be. Marcus's trail led through a narrow passage that opened into a cathedral-like chamber. Bioluminescent crystals studded the ceiling like stars, casting an ethereal blue glow over everything. At the center of the chamber, an underground river rushed through, its waters black as night and cold as space. She found him there, kneeling by the water's edge, washing his wounds. He didn't run when she emerged from the passage. Instead, he continued his task as if her presence was expected, even welcome. "You know," he said without turning around, "on Earth, we have stories about hunters and prey. Sometimes the rabbit outwits the fox, sometimes David beats Goliath, sometimes the mouse bells the cat." Kayla approached slowly, her claws extended but not yet committed to the kill. "Stories won't save you." "No," Marcus agreed, finally turning to face her. "But understanding might. Do you know why I chose this place?" Before she could answer, a low rumble echoed through the chamber. The crystals above flickered, their light dimming momentarily. From the far side of the river, something massive stirred in the shadows. "Because," Marcus continued, rising to his feet, "I studied your history during my captivity. This place, the Whispering Gorge, is where your people learned they weren't always the hunters. Sometimes they were the hunted. The creature that emerged from the darkness was nightmare-made flesh. A gorge stalker, ancient beyond measure, its bulk covered in armor-like plates that had turned to stone over millennia. Eyes like burning coals fixed on the two figures by the water. Kayla had heard of such creatures in legends, but they were supposed to be extinct. "Clever human," she hissed, her body automatically shifting into a defensive stance. "You led me here to die." "No," Marcus said, surprising her again. "I led us here to survive, together." The gorge stalker moved with impossible speed for its size. Kayla barely had time to dodge as it lunged, its massive claws gouging trenches in the stone where she'd stood. She rolled aside, her training taking over, but this was no ordinary prey. This was a predator that had hunted her kind when they were young. Marcus didn't run. Instead, he grabbed a crystal formation from the ground, its sharp edge glowing with internal light. As the creature turned toward him, drawn by movement, he stood his ground. "Hey, over here!" He waved the crystal, its light creating dancing shadows on the cave walls. The stalker's attention fixed on him, and Kayla saw her chance. She launched herself at the creature's exposed flank, her claws seeking the gaps in its ancient armor. But her strike, which would have felled any normal beast, merely scratched the surface. The creature whirled, catching her with a backhand blow that sent her flying. She hit the wall hard, green blood spattering the stone. Through the haze of pain, she saw Marcus charge the beast not with the crystal but with something else. A makeshift torch he'd fashioned, its flames bright in the darkness. "Fire!" he shouted. "They're afraid of fire." How did he know that? Kayla struggled to her feet as the stalker recoiled from the flames. Ancient instincts older than its armor made it retreat, but cornered and angry, it wouldn't flee. It would kill them both. Working together without words, they began to coordinate. When the stalker lunged at Marcus, Kayla struck from behind. When it turned on her, he was there with the fire driving it back. It was a dance of death, predator and prey roles blurring until survival was all that mattered. The battle seemed to last hours but was probably minutes. Finally, Marcus saw an opening. Above the stalker, a massive stalactite hung precariously, weakened by ages of water erosion. "The ceiling!" he yelled. "Strike there!" Kayla didn't question. She leaped with all her strength, claws extended, hitting. The precise point where stone met stone, the stalactite shuddered, cracked, and fell. The gorge stalker had one moment to look up before tons of ancient stone crashed down upon it. Silence fell over the chamber, broken only by their labored breathing. Kayla found herself sitting on the ground, exhausted and bleeding. Marcus knelt nearby, the torch flickering in his hand. "Why?" she asked. the question containing multitudes. Because, he said, meeting her eyes, survival isn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about adapting, thinking, working together. You could have let me die. I could have let the stalker take you. But we both chose differently. Kayla stared at him, this strange human who had upended everything she thought she knew. He was right. In that moment, facing death together, the roles of hunter and prey had ceased to matter. They had simply been two beings trying to survive. They hunt, she said slowly. It's not over. No, Marcus agreed. But maybe it's changed. Maybe we've both learned something. As they tended their wounds in the crystal-lit chamber, neither spoke of what would come next. The sacred hunt demanded death, but something fundamental had shifted. Kayla found herself studying Marcus not as prey, but as something else entirely. An equal? An ally? She didn't have words for it in her language. When they finally emerged from the caves, dawn was breaking over the gorge. The jungle seemed different, somehow, less like a hunting ground and more like a living world full of possibilities. They had entered as hunter and prey. They emerged as something new. But as they made their way back toward civilization, a new sound reached them through the trees. War horns, deep and resonant, echoing across the canopy. Kayla's scales paled. Your people? Marcus asked. The clan, she confirmed. They're coming to witness the kill, or to enforce it if I've failed. They stood at a crossroads, both literal and metaphorical. Behind them lay the wild lands where they'd forged an unlikely alliance. Ahead, the weight of tradition and expectation. So what happens now? Marcus asked. Kayla was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun rise over her world. When she spoke, her voice carried a new note, one that surprised them both. Now we face them together. And we show them that some traditions need to die so that others might live. The war horn sounded again, closer now. Whatever came next, they would meet it not as hunter and prey, but as something the Zephyr clan had never seen before. Equals. The choice, the clan's war party emerged from the jungle like a storm-given form. 50 warriors in full ceremonial armor, their scales painted with the ancient symbols of judgment. At their head rode warrior Prime Vex, Kayla's own mentor, his face a mask of disappointment and duty. They found Kayla and Marcus in a clearing near the ritual grounds, standing side by side rather than hunter over prey. The sight sent ripples of confusion through the assembled warriors. In 27 previous hunts, Kayla had always returned dragging her kill. Now she stood with the human as if he were a companion. Kayla of the Burning Peaks, Vex intoned, his voice carrying the weight of law. The sacred hunt began at dawn yesterday. Where is your kill? Kayla stepped forward, her posture straight despite her wounds. The hunt took an unexpected turn. Warrior Prime, the human still breathes. Vex cut her off. That is all that matters. You have failed. The law is clear. The law is incomplete, Kayla countered, causing gasps among the warriors. It speaks of hunter and prey, predator and victim. But what of the prey that becomes an ally? What of the hunt that reveals a greater truth? Marcus watched the exchange, understanding enough of the language to follow. He could see the tension in every warrior's stance, the way their hands hovered near weapons. But also in some, he saw curiosity. Pretty words, Vex said coldly. But tradition is not mere words. It is the foundation of our society. You were chosen as our greatest hunter. The human was selected as worthy prey. The hunt must end with death. There is no other way. There's always another way. Marcus spoke up, using his limited Zephyrian. On Earth, we have a saying, the rules of war are written by the survivors. Your tradition assumes the hunter always wins. But what happens when both survive? A young warrior in the ranks spoke out of turn. Nothing survives the gorge stalker. The words hung in the air. Vex's eyes narrowed. You entered the Whispering Gorge? We did, Kayla confirmed. And we faced one of the ancient ones, not as hunter and prey, but as allies. We survived because we chose cooperation over tradition. Impossible, Vex declared, but doubt crept into his voice. The Gorge Stalkers were legend, monsters from the time before time. If they had truly faced one— I can prove it, Marcus said. He reached into his torn jacket and produced something that made every warrior step back. A scale the size of his palm, dark as night, but shot through with veins of silver. A Gorge Stalker scale. Elder Thane, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward to examine the scale. His ancient eyes widened with recognition and something else. Fear. This is real, he whispered. They speak truth. They faced the old death and lived. The clearing erupted in heated discussion. Warriors argued among themselves, tradition warring with evidence. Through it all, Vex remained focused on Kayla. Even if this is true, he said, it changes nothing. The hunt must have its conclusion. If you will not kill the human, then you must face judgment. Trial by combat. You know the law. Kayla nodded slowly. She had expected this. I accept, but I name my champion. You cannot— Vex began. I can, Kayla interrupted. The law allows it for those who have been wounded in sacred duty. I name the human, Marcus Chen, as my champion. The silence that followed was deafening. No prey had ever been named champion. It was unprecedented, unthinkable. This is madness, Vex snarled. The human cannot stand against our warriors. Then you have nothing to fear, Marcus said, stepping forward. He was tired, wounded, and facing beings faster and stronger than himself. But he'd been here before, in different forms. I accept the role of champion. Elder Thane raised his staff. The law is clear. A champion named is a champion recognized. Who will stand for tradition? A dozen warriors volunteered, but Vex silenced them with a gesture. I will face the human myself. When I defeat him, Kayla will accept her fate. The circle formed quickly, warriors creating a ring of bodies and weapons. Vex shed his outer armor, revealing the intricate scars of 100 victories. Marcus stripped to the waist, his human form looking fragile in comparison. The combat will continue until one yields or dies, Elder Thane announced. May the truth be revealed in blood. They circled each other, predator and prey in their most basic forms. Vex attacked first, his speed blinding. Marcus barely dodged, feeling claws whistle past his face. The warrior's follow-up strike caught him in the ribs, sending him rolling. You see, Vex called to the crowd. This is the natural order. The strong consume the weak. Marcus got to his feet, blood running from fresh wounds. Maybe, but I've noticed something about your natural order. It assumes a fair fight. He grabbed a handful of dirt and threw it at Vex's eyes. As the warrior recoiled, Marcus struck low, targeting the knee joint where armor didn't protect. Vex staggered, more from surprise than pain. You fight without honor, someone shouted. I fight to survive, Marcus corrected. Like your ancestors did before traditions made them soft. The words stung more than any blow. Vex attacked with renewed fury, but Marcus had found his rhythm. He couldn't match the Zephyr's strength or speed, but he had experience. Every dirty trick learned in Earth's special operations, every survival instinct honed in a dozen conflicts. He used the warrior's own momentum against him, redirecting rather than blocking. When Vex overextended, Marcus was there, striking at vulnerabilities. Not to kill, but to slow, to frustrate, to prove a point. The fight wore on, longer than any had expected. Both combatants bled now, their movements slower, but no less determined. In the crowd, murmurs grew. The human wasn't winning, but he wasn't losing either. He was enduring. Finally, Vex made a mistake. Frustration led to overconfidence, and Marcus saw his opening. Instead of attacking, he let the warrior's strike land, catching the arm and using the momentum to throw Vex over his shoulder. They hit, the ground together, Marcus on top. A sharp rock pressed against the warrior's throat. Yield, Marcus gasped, blood dripping onto Vex's face. This doesn't have to end in death. Vex's eyes burned with rage and something else. Confusion. The weak human had him at his mercy, but offered life instead of taking it. Why? He asked. Because, Marcus said, strength isn't just about killing. Sometimes it's about knowing when not to. The two lay there, locked in that moment of choice. Around them, the clan watched in silence. Finally, Vex's hand moved, not to attack but to tap the ground 3 times, the signal of yield. Marcus rolled off him, exhausted beyond measure. The circle erupted in chaos. A prey had defeated a warrior prime. The impossible had happened. Elder Thane struck his staff against the ground repeatedly until silence returned. The combat has spoken. The human stands victorious. The old laws, perhaps they need examining. Kayla helped Marcus to his feet, supporting him as he swayed. You didn't have to do this, she said softly. Yes, I did, he replied. Because something's changing here. Not just between us, but between our peoples. We can be more than predator and prey. Vex stood slowly, his pride warring with a newfound respect. This changes things, he admitted. But what do we do now? Our entire society is built on the hunt. Maybe, Kayla suggested, we build something new. The Gorge Stalker taught us that cooperation can overcome any predator. Perhaps it's time we learned that lesson as a people. The arguments that followed would continue for days, but the seed was planted. Marcus and Kayla stood at the center of it all, no longer hunter and prey but partners in something unprecedented. As the sun set over Xerion, painting the sky in familiar reds and golds, Marcus turned to Kayla. So what happens now? She looked at him, then at her people, torn between tradition and possibility. Now we write a new story, one where strength comes not from killing, but from understanding, where humans and Zephyr might find a different path. The war horns sounded again, but this time they carried a different note. Not of hunt or battle, but of change, of possibility, of a future where 2 species might meet as equals rather than enemies. The greatest hunt in Xerion's history had ended not with death but with life, and perhaps that was the greatest victory of all.